Hey, good evening, Maples family. It's Thursday night, and we're looking at Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. And tonight, we're picking up on Boaz from the book of Ruth from the Old Testament. And we need to take an understanding of who Boaz is and why his response is just so spectacular here. Boaz was a relative of Elimelech, who was Naomi's husband. All right, you got that down? Elimelech, Naomi's husband. He was related to Boaz. Boaz was not his closest living relative. It was another man. But he was a close living relative. And Boaz was incredibly wealthy. But he also appears to be a godly man. In verse 4 of chapter 2 of Ruth, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted his harvesters and said this, "The Lord be with you." Now, for a master to greet his servants in such a manner as equals, "The Lord be with you," and also with you, that's astounding. Boaz appeared to be this deeply committed believer in God, Yahweh, keeper of the law, follower of Yahweh. The next verse, though, is really interesting. "The Lord be with you. The Lord be with you." Then Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Say, who does that young woman there belong to? Who does that young woman there belong to?" It's an interesting question to ask from Boaz's point of view. She was just a woman that was following behind the harvesters, trying to glean what she could from the field. But evidently something about Ruth stood out. Perhaps she was a great beauty. Perhaps. We're not told. Perhaps there was just something about her. Just something about her. Maybe. Perhaps there was something moving within God's Spirit, moving within Boaz, moving within Ruth. Perhaps, maybe, just maybe, God and His prevenient grace was at work. Was at work leading, guiding, prompting Boaz to ask, say, Earl? Yeah, come here. Who does that girl belong to? And thus the story began. Because he responded to her, she is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. And that said it all. Immediately we see that Boaz knew who she was in her story. It was clear because the story had already preceded them. You don't walk into a little town like Bethlehem from such a prominent family as Elimelech and Naomi, and you come slinking back in after having all of your male relatives die, and now you're poor and destitute with no redeemer, and not have people wag their tongues. It just doesn't happen. How many of you have lived in a small town? Raise your hand. And the one thing I think you understand from living in a small town is everybody, and I do mean everybody, know your business. And a lot of times they up in your business. There are no secrets and there's not much privacy. There's no way that this Moabite woman, Ruth, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, could slink back into town without being noticed. And so, evidently, Boaz had her brought to him because she said, the next line is, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for except for a short rest in the shelter. Wow. She worked all day. The overseer saw this. He was reporting this to Boaz, and Boaz knew that she was doing this for her mother-in-law. It had to have impressed him. So Boaz said to Ruth in verse 8, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field. Don't go anywhere else. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Don't leave. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. And I've told the men not to lay a hand on you." So evidently this was a dangerous place. A lot of times there could have been some bad things go on. And if Boaz went to and had his quote-unquote reapers told hands off, that must say that we need to be paying attention to the danger and the chance that Ruth was taking. But Boaz took care of it. He said, I told him not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from water from the jars that the men have filled. You can drink from our jars, which was a big deal, because drinking from the same jar could make you ritually unclean and impure. But drink from the jars. At this point, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she said, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" I mean, Boaz shouldn't have cared about her. I mean, she was a Moabite. She was from somewhere else. She wasn't one of them. She was a stranger. Stranger. And she said, "I've been blessed." And she had. Because Boaz is required by the Levitical codes to allow them to glean and to leave what is not picked up by the cutters and the sheaf tires. They're not allowed to go back through the field twice. But Boaz went one better. He said, "Nah, you come drink. Don't go to any other fields. I've told my men to lay hands off you, and you can glean whatever you want." So she was like, "Dude, why? What have I done to be so lucky that you..." I'm sure she said dude. But she said, "I'm so lucky that you are doing this. I'm so blessed. What have I done that you would even notice me?" And Boaz says, "Look, everybody has heard. I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Word travels fast, even good word. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And here is a metaphor that we should not miss. Under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Over and over in the Old and the New Testament, this imagery of being gathered under the wings of God, as if God is a mother hen protecting her brood. And it shows up when Jesus stands looking over Jerusalem, and he says, "Oh, I would gather you up as a mother hen with her chicks under her wing." God has gathered Ruth under his wings so she can take refuge. Boaz is quite obviously a deeply committed man of God. He has a deep and abiding faith, and he has perception. We would say today that he has the spiritual gift of discernment, perhaps the spiritual gift of wisdom. Certainly, God is at work in his life, even here in the Old Testament, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Yes, even here in the Old Testament. He can see her for who she is. Boaz chose to see Ruth for who she was, to see the real value, the real strength, the real worth Boaz saw her. That is the clearest thing I can say about the quality of this man. That someone that is generally invisible in the world, people that people step over all the time, walk past and ignore, people that shouldn't even have been considered people, Boaz saw her. And there are people in our world that are invisible, that we choose to ignore or not see because it is so painful to have to look at them, or because it will require us to take such extraordinary actions. We choose not to see evil because it confronts us and breaks our heart. We choose not to see the poor, the destitute, the homeless. We choose not to see systemic racism. We choose not to see lives lived outside of God's will for His moral and ethical codes. We choose not to see systems and dynamics that tear down human dignity and offer no real hope. We choose to see systems that will lead to enslavement rather than freedom and liberty. We choose to not see what we don't want to see, because sometimes the pain of seeing it and the requirement then that we would have to do something about it if we've seen it is just too much for us to handle. Boaz could have done this with Ruth. He could have chose not to see her. He could have said, I'm not going to get involved. Oy vey. But he chose to get involved. I know it's hard for us. I struggle with it when we have so many folks that come for assistance and you end up talking with them and you're like, you experience assistance fatigue, right? Compassion fatigue. I get it. But we cannot stop seeing them. We cannot stop seeing people. We cannot. We cannot stop seeing. We have to choose to see. And Boaz saw, and not only did he see, he set in motion things that that played out very interestingly. We see that that not only did he let her do these things, but like at mealtime, he said, come over here and have some bread and dip it in this wine and vinegar. And she sat down with the harvesters, and he offered her some roasted grains, and she ate all that she wanted and had some left over. And she got up to glean, but Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. I mean, he was taking special efforts to protect her. When she got back, of course, Naomi's like, whoa, where'd all this come from, girlfriend? Look at this. You did good, but what? And Ruth told her, and then Naomi had some wisdom. She's like, hold on a minute here. We may have a redeemer. And she became proactive. We talked about that Sunday that she took her own rescue in her own hands. She started doing the things that she needed to move the ball down the field. Sometimes we are called to wait on God, but sometimes we're called to be proactive. We have to do things that will assist in our own redemption, our own sanctification. We have to be participants at least. We can't be the originators. It isn't by our power. But we have to be participants. We have to be willing. And Naomi set up this opportunity. Not to force, not to cajole, not to trap, but set up this opportunity for Boaz to be who he really wanted to be, and Naomi to be redeemed, and Ruth to find a husband. And so she tells her, he's going to be, they're doing all this harvesting. He'll be on the threshing floor doing the threshing. And what happened is there'd be a large pit dug, and then a smaller pit inside that pit, and they'd put these metal grates, and they would, on the threshing floor, the person doing it would beat the grain stalks until these grains fell out down onto the bottom through the grates in the threshing floor. And then they'd be scooped up and tossed, and you'd toss them in the wind with these big baskets, and the wind would blow through it and blow the chaff away if there was any left. There was quite a process. We see this again in Gideon being on the floor of the threshing floor when the angel of the Lord appears him and calls him as a judge. We see that. And we see it here on the threshing floor. And evidently he got so tired that he just stayed on the floor that night. He was down in the pit, generally a fairly safe place. And Boaz laid down to sleep, and she slipped onto the threshing floor, uncovered his feet, and lay down at his feet. And when his feet got cold, he woke up, and he saw her there, and he had the opportunity to say to her, I will be your redeemer. I mean, she was obviously making it known, I kind of like you. I mean, she didn't pass him a note that says, if you like me, mark X or Y. She didn't do that. She didn't, TikTok him or Snapchat him or Facebook or Instagram him or even tweet it. But she did give him clear ancient Near Eastern indications that I would be amenable if you would put your cloak over me and take me into your household. Because that's what that meant. Laying down at his feet was her submitting to him, and him putting his cloak over her is symbolic of him receiving her into himself. Yeah. Boaz stepped up. And then the way he handled it later was so awesome. He sits by the gate waiting for the guy that's supposed to be doing the redeeming that isn't stepping up. And he says, hey, brother, come here. Yeah, come here. Look, come meet 12 of y'all, come here. I need some elders. And he called them, and they all sat down, and I'm sure the guy he called to was thinking, oh, great, where is this going? And he pretty much accused him of not redeeming them. That knowing that they're there, you knew they were here, and you haven't done anything about it. So are you going to redeem them? And the guy says, yeah, I will. I'm going to do it. Now, how he was going to do that? Up for debate. And so Boaz says, okay, then you're going to have to marry Ruth so that you can give her a son. He's going, whoa, wait a minute. Because that will diminish what my current children have, because then that child will also be my child and will be able to take from my inheritance and will put my children's inheritance at risk. He will be another man's son, technically, although he is my son, but he is technically my relative's son, but he will have the right to take from me. Oh, I can't do this. I can't give her a son. And so Boaz is like, well, I'll do it. I'll take it. I will buy the piece of property. I will take on Elimelech's heritage, and I will marry Ruth and give her progeny. And he did. Now, we don't know if this is his first, last, if he had multiple wives. We know that certainly polygamy was an accepted practice in this time and in this place. We don't hear about any of these other wives. We hear about Ruth. And we don't see Boaz expressing the same concerns as the other man. No. We see Boaz stepping up to the plate to redeem. Now, perhaps he had never married. Perhaps he had been widowed and had not had a child. Perhaps he was childless. Or perhaps he had a child by another marriage, that he was a widow, or perhaps he is still married. but he does what he believes is the right thing. And Ruth and Naomi are saved. Boaz did what was required of him by the Mosaic law, by the Levitical codes. He did what was right in God's eyes, and he cared for those less fortunate. Every evidence is that he was a man of God. May have been wealthy, may have been powerful, but he did God's will. I hope that in this days of COVID and harsh political tensions and all of the things going on around us, that we are raising up men like Boaz. I hope we are men like Boaz, willing to do what is right every time. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you here tomorrow night where we finish up